Yes, thank you. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the book review arranged by the Center for Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. I'm your host, Ali Ahmed Shraib. I probably gathered a medical doctor is thinking, what are you imposing here in the middle of Center for Asian and Middle Eastern Studies? I have a fascination with this topic and this area, and therefore I'm a lifelong student and therefore volunteering for this. So I've had the honor to actually be presented with the book by our guest, written by our guest today, Ms. Dalia Ziada, on the titled Curious Case of the Three-Legged Wolf, Egypt and the Military, Islamism and Liberal Democracy. So before we go into this book review and our discussion with our guests, I just want to tell you a little bit about the Center for Asian and Middle Eastern Studies. It is short for CAMES. We have a active WhatsApp group, and CAMES is actually a non-partisan organization based in London, promoting activities that are to understand Asian and Middle East better and act as a hub for engaging in the region's arts, culture, and the politics. So we engage through research and dialogue, facilitate a better understanding of these regions from socio-economic and political viewpoints. So we've taken quite a few lectures recently, actually, on the series on terrorism, colonialism, the Ottoman Empire, and civilizational studies. And you'll find some of our recordings on, we can easily give you links to these, we have them on a YouTube page as well. We've also had several interviews and some coming up, including regarding the unfolding events that are taking place in India, Libya, and through these interviews and lectures, we're hoping to have a better understanding of the people, culture, and politics of Asia and the Middle East. Now, we know a lot of things are happening, especially in the Middle East. Yes, I think the last week's news has been dominated by the events in Ukraine and Russia. But in the last few decades, Egypt has not been out of the news. And every decade, there will be something happening where there's a contribution where Egyptian society has an impact both locally as well as internationally. And the effect of what is happening in Egypt is also reverberated throughout the Middle East. So today is really a focus on Egypt, especially through the lenses of our esteemed guest today, Dalia Ziada. The format is, I'll introduce her to you very shortly, and then we will sort of launch into a discussion about a review of her book, or to ask her to tell us about her book. I don't know how many of you have had a chance to get hold of her book. It is available on Amazon, can be ordered. And if you had a chance, do raise your hand and let us know. And if not, I'm sure you will be encouraged to go and pick this book up and actually read, because I found it a fascinating read as well. Now, so the format is, once introduced, about 30 to 45 minutes of discussion led by me, and then following any comments and Q&A, a part of the question and answer session from our guests and our participants today for another 30 odd minutes or so, and feel free. So I'd like you to all just keep your mics muted and mobiles muted if it's possible, please. We definitely encourage question and comments, and no question is too outrageous or outlandish, but we ask it to be done within the decorum of civility and maintain a professional approach. We also encourage our attendees to take notes and just to remind them really, and maybe formulate your questions as we go along. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our guest. Ms. Dalia Ziada is the founding director of the Liberal Democracy Institute. It is a Cairo-based think tank dedicated to studying and promoting and advising policymakers on advancing liberal democracy and countering violent extremism and political Islamism in Egypt and the Middle East. She is also a civil society professional and socio-political analyst. Now, her areas of expertise include civil military relations in Egypt and the Middle East, political Islamists and terrorism, countering violent extremism around radicalization, international security studies, internal political affairs in Egypt, that'll be a quite juicy topic, I'm sure, regional political and security dynamics in the Middle East, liberal democracy and human rights. The list is quite an impressive list, actually, and also the women's rights in the Arab world. And her particular area of focus, I would say, in this book is the issue of non-violent action and the strategies of political activists and change, people who want to make change through non-violent action, and how that has impact. And the discussion in the area of civil society in the Arab world, US foreign policy in the Middle East. So she actually studied on international relations and specifically focused on international security studies at the Fletcher School of Law, the university, Tufts University in the USA. And so I'm delighted to welcome her on your behalf today. And she has recently authored her book, which was published in 2019, very interestingly titled, The Curious Case. Here we go, I've got the copy of that book, very, very popular. By the way, it's one of the most well-thumbed books I have. I'm sorry about destroying the edges of that, but it looks like it's studied well, basically. The Curious Case of the Three-Legged Wolf, Egypt, Military Islamism and the Liberal Democracy. So that's really the title that we want to discuss. And I'm sure the title alone starts off a lot of questions in your mind. So I'm going to start it off basically asking Dalia, thank you very much for joining us. Can I ask you to basically give some idea how you came up with the book and the title, basically? What made you decide to write about this, please?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ali, for the introduction, and thank you for Kames for the great work you do. Actually, I would start, as you said, by giving a general idea about the book. And thank you. It seems like actually you have already studied the book really well. I can see from how it looks like, and it makes me really happy. So actually, the idea of the book came from my own personal experience with the Egyptian revolution. At that time, I was 27 years old. I was in Tahrir Square, and I experienced everything firsthand. And the best thing about it is that I also had some experience with studying nonviolent action and strategies before coming to Tahrir Square as a revolutionist myself, as a person who is participating in a protest and encouraging others to protest. So seeing what I have been studying for a while happening in front of my eyes was really extraordinary. So I thought one day I should document this in a form of a written book, a video, or something like that. But actually what makes the case of the Egyptian revolution unique in some way is that it was not only an action of like popular protesting using peaceful means to express yourself and to pressure the government or the regime at that time to dismantle or to fall down because of your pressure as people through only peaceful means without any violence or anything. But what was really interesting about all that is what we've seen later on happening from the side of the government, the regime itself, in the form of the military, I would say, which I called in the book reverse nonviolent action. Which I think it will be a new theory, actually, that we have seen later on happening in other countries, where you will see that the power that should be an oppressive power, is putting down their traditional weapons, putting down their traditional means of oppressing protesters, and using the same tactics, the same nonviolent tactics that the protesters are using to contain them. So actually we ended up having a situation, it was like, some kind of a non-violent war where protesters are employing their own tactics that we have been like being trained on, or even those who applied it spontaneously out of believing in the cause they were fighting for. And at the same time, you're having the forces that is opposing you, your adversary who's more powerful is leaving all his power and using your tactics to contain you. And this did not only stop at the time of the revolution, did not only stop at the time when Mubarak stepped down and the regime has already left the office, but it even continued after for about 2 or 3, about until 2015 actually. So for about 3 years or 4 years after the revolution, it continued like this, nonviolent action being employed even in how different the three legs, you know, have been competing on power in Egypt after the revolution to fill in the vacuum that was left open when Mubarak and his regime, his dictatorship regime left the office. So we had the three legs, which actually are in the title of the book, military Islamism and liberal democratic activists, or the young people of the revolution. So the three of them were competing with each other to fill in this gap. And in the process, some fell down, some couldn't keep remaining nonviolent for long enough, and some actually were more experienced and more powerful and won at the end, won the game at the end, and became now the rulers.
Okay, well, no, that's really good to know that you were actually in the thick of this, and having a observer perspective is always, I mean, I think many academics will write based on what others have written and their analysis of literature. And just going into this topic, you've detailed your methodology in terms of researching this book, and you mentioned about the the sort of literature, not only reviewed the literature, but you've interviewed key actors in this whole sort of situation, from military officers, revolutionary leaders, both in the liberal democratic camps as well as the political Islamist camps as well. So that's very good to sort of read that you've had perspectives from different sides looking at that. Now, my ask of you would be so you've built an argument, and you've already given me the key terminology there, which is a reverse non-violent action, RNA. And by the way, RNA is something to fear these days because it's linked with the vaccine, RNA vaccine. that is unfortunately, so now everybody likes the word RNA, but in the context of our discussion today is the three-letter acronym is for reverse non-violent action, which is taken by what you have identified as the military putting down their arms and doing this. But you've mentioned here in your book the argument that you have built was that the 2011 revolution, which is where the book is sort of predicated around. The 2011 revolution, which I think the whole world was looking because of the Arab Spring, just before that Tunisia took place, and literally there was an expectation of domino-like effect throughout the whole of the Middle East, of regimes falling, and maybe finally an ability for the people of that region to actually breathe from stifling sort of dictatorship and authoritarian regimes. So I think if I remember very clearly, we were glued to the television watching what was going on in Tahrir Square. But you mentioned, and you've argued the case that, and I quote you, high commitment to non-violent discipline by the so it wasn't only due to the success of the 2011 revolution, was not only due to the high commitment to non-violence by the protesters, discipline by the protesters, but the military strategic choice to use reverse non-violent action, end quote. Can you expand on that a little bit, maybe explaining the reverse non-violent action a little bit more? So I'm just going to, sort of, that phrase comes on the back of non-violent action itself by, activists, non-violent sanctions, you mentioned that, and also counter non-violent sanctions. And then on the back of that, you mentioned about reverse non-violent action. So if you could just, because that, I found it a little bit difficult getting my head around that. And if you could kindly expand on that, I'd be really grateful. Yeah.
Yeah, so I will try to simplify it as much as I can. So actually, for those who were following the revolution, you must have noticed how it started. When it started, first of all, it was not really an organized action. Like there was not, for example, a certain political party that came out and said, let's go tomorrow and make a revolution. No, it was a number of events, political events, even oppressive events from the regime, several, it was, as I like to describe it, like the situation was ripe for the revolution. We were seeing how the Tunisian people are doing just 15 days ago, and we're becoming very jealous. We have been building up, especially the youth. Like when I say we, I speak about like the young liberal youth who believed very much in democracy at a time when no one believed in actually. And at the time we were very much believing that we can make change happen. We can make Egypt a better place. We can get rid of the dictator. But the problem was actually, I may like discuss this later, is that, okay, we knew how to get rid of the dictator, but we did not know how to build up democracy after his fall. And this was a big mistake, actually, that eventually led to having the liberal democratic youth who made this revolution, who were the fuel of this revolution, to be marginalized later on. So basically, when the people came to the street, there were, as usual, as you can see in all protests, public protests or popular revolutions or so, always the media comes out and says they are terrorists, they are strangers, they don't belong to here. But at the first day of the revolution, I saw something that was really amazing and unexpected, is that even the people who are not usually active in politics, like, you know, for example, older people, people who are like housewives. I saw people like this coming out from their homes and participating and saying enough is enough. Like we want to change this. We want the change to happen. So this built up a movement that was very disciplined to nonviolent action. Either they know it, like for example, the young people who were already participating in political activities from before should have somehow heard about nonviolent action, read some books about it, maybe attended some training sessions about it. So they were familiar with the topic. But for even the ordinary people who were not politically active at all, to now become more disciplined to this nonviolent action, actually closed or stopped those who were trying to distort the revolutionaries or the revolution by saying that they are terrorists or so. And then things went fine until all of a sudden, of course, the regime wanted to defend itself. The number is increasing. They want to disperse the protesters. So they sent the police forces and they asked them to be as brutal as they can. And actually, it ended up being a very horrible day in Tahrir Square on the 26th and 27th of January. Like the revolution started on 25th, which was, by the way, the anniversary of the police.
That's right.
It was interesting, like, you know, people went there to protest against the police, and it ended up being a revolution this way. So they sent the police. The police was very brutal. So somehow their brutality backfired on them. So more people came out to the street. Rather than fearing away, going back to their homes, more people came out to the street, and they were able to beat them. Although they are the ones who are having the force, who are having the oppressive force, they couldn't do anything, and they ended up being distracted and dispersed. And then on the 28th of January, which is the third day of the revolution, the military decided to intervene. And here was the very first time we see the reverse nonviolent action being applied. So the military came in with knowing that oppressive tools will not work. It won't work that we just go out and kill everyone and it will be fine. No, it wouldn't work like that, especially that there was also external pressure from the United States, which, by the way, the relationship between the Egyptian military and the American military is very strong up till now and during the revolution, all the time. So there were some calls, as I found out from some military officers that I quoted in the book, either from the American side or the Egyptian side, and somehow they convinced them or asked them, like, no need to use the force. Try to contain the protesters in a peaceful way as much as possible. So the military came to Tahrir Square at that time with this in mind, like using oppressive force is not an option. So we have to find other options. So actually at the time they arrived to Tahrir Square, they arrived in military vehicles and tanks. So you can imagine, like, being there, actually I get like my skin having goosebumps. Yeah, again. So actually, like, being in Tahrir Square protesting, and you just came out from 2 or 3 days of horrible encounter with the police forces, many people either injured or killed, bad, very bad. And then you see the tanks and the vehicles coming down to Tahrir Square. Of course, we had in our minds, like, imagining all the bad things that could happen in the world, like they're coming to kill us and so. But all of a sudden, someone shouted from the side of the military, actually, that people and the military are one hand, which later on became the slogan of the revolution.
How do you say it in Arabic? How do you say that in Arabic?
الشعب والجيش إيد واحدة.
إيد واحدة.
يد واحدة. يعني people and the army, people and the military are one hand. So they shouted like this, and people even like people on the side of the protest, after being very scared of what could happen, now they are more happy, more eased, and yes, people and the military are one hand. So the military arrived like this, and this is actually was the first tactic of reverse nonviolent action. Like, they kind of made a protest of their own, saying that we belong to you, we are here to stand with you. And for some reason, actually, the military at that time was really not so happy with the Mubarak regime, because at the time he wanted to install his son in power, Gamal Mubarak. And
mentioned that, yes.
Yeah, and if you know Egypt, you know that all over our history, it's always military in power, military in presidency. So it's very difficult to accept like a civilian in power, especially he's not military trained or anything. He was a banker in the UK and then came back to Egypt and started to practice politics. So it was not convincing to them to have someone like him in power, or accept that Mubarak puts him in power and not the generals. So somehow they agreed with the protesters on this. So there was a common ground. So once the tanks came in, they allowed the people even to jump on the tanks and the vehicles and, to celebrate with them. And we started to see this celebratory atmosphere happening in the square in the next 3 or 4 days. But actually, the interesting part here is that this created some kind of a prisoner's dilemma for Mubarak. Who at that time felt like his own military, by the way, Mubarak in his position as the president of the state, he's also the higher commander of the military.
That's right.
Supreme commander of the military. So he all of a sudden he felt like there is a coup inside the military against him. So he started to think like, okay, are they selling me out now to the protesters? They are not supporting me anymore. They should be standing on my side. So this created this prisoner's dilemma. So Mubarak actually I think when February started, like towards the end of the revolution, or the time he decided to step down, he tried to make orders to remove the heads of the military, like the head of the joint staff and the chief joint staff and also the Minister of Defense.
Armed Forces, yeah.
Exactly. So actually, this even worsens the relationship between Mubarak and the military at that time, and made the military more willing to side with the people. So this is how, this was the first signs of reverse nonviolent action, how it was employed. And then after the revolution, even when the Supreme Council of Armed Forces, which is the highest body in the military, took the leadership later on after Mubarak stepped down, they even continued to apply these tactics on the protesters. And on other, and here, when I say the protesters, by the way, I speak about the liberal democratic youth and also the political Islamists. It's true they were not there from the political Islamists. I mean, they were not there from the first day, but they joined later on, and their role was very, very important actually in making the revolution succeed toward, or to continue at least toward the end, toward this pressuring Mubarak to step down. So the military continued to apply these tactics until finally they were able, again, to dominate the scene once again.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I mean, I think, you do go into detail in your book, and I think it's important that we, even though the basis of the book is around the revolution, the one thing that I really enjoyed about your book is that you don't skimp on the history of Egypt. And I think it's important to our audience to realize that your chapters really go through from Ramses the third. I think you start off from his time and the labor strike in his period by a peasant named Kun Anub. You start off in his time, that the whole nonviolent activism started in the old sort of pharaonic times, and Egypt has seen some of it as early as the 1800 BC period. And I think for our audience who have not actually had a chance to review your book, I think it's important that we sort of, because you build up this whole revolution thing right to the end, but you nicely put the context behind it, which I think is important to actually mention to people. That first of all, you talk about the whole curious case of Egypt, because there's been a lot of discussion about, is Egypt like the other Arab countries? And you argued against that. And you said, is Egypt Tunisia? It's not Tunisia. And could you sort of maybe elaborate a little bit? Because in Tunisia, we saw a non-violent revolution as well. I mean, we saw Ben Ali coming down, very quickly. It was sparked off by, the individual who set himself afire. And similarly, I think in Egypt, it was one young man who was beaten up by police in Alexandria that sort of triggered it off, and the brutal tactics that the police employed. So why would you say, I mean, you mentioned this, that you don't think it's the same as Tunisia? Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure, yeah, but first on the historical part, actually, the interesting thing is when I was doing the research, I found out that since the time of the pharaonic Egypt, the ancient Egypt, we always had this trend of conflict between the three legs of the wolf, as I say in the title, which is the people who control religion, the people who control military power, and young people who are more rebellious, who want to change. This trend has been going on all over our history since some 6,000 years ago. So it was interesting to see this happening again and again over history and up till modern day. And I think in the future as well.
Yeah.
So speaking about why Egypt was a unique case actually in the Arab Spring. Actually, the Arab Spring happened in countries of Tunisia, Egypt, Yemen, Syria, and also there were the second wave of the Arab Springs that we've seen recently happening in Lebanon and Sudan. But the Egypt case was very unique and very different from all of those in the fact that it used or these three elements composing the political scene in Egypt were again competing with each other, which we have not seen in other countries. At the same time, that's why actually it ended up that way. It ended up developing into the results that we have seen later on and the consequences that we have seen later on. And that's why, for example, I remember that some scholars at the time of the Arab Spring used to compare Egypt to Tunisia all the time. But in fact, it's very different than Tunisia, because Tunisia and Egypt were the only two successful cases of the Arab Spring, meaning that they were able to bring down the dictator and to build some kind of a political system that kept moving on afterwards. But actually Egypt, given its demographic fabric and its history and the dynamics of the relationship between the three main players in the political scene, the military, the religion, and the young people, was very different. I think it was much closer to the scenario of Syria than it is close to the scenario of Tunisia. Right. And also another important factor is that in Tunisia, for example, the number of the population is only 10 million people, or was 10 million people at the time. At the time of the revolution, Egypt was 90 million people. Now we are over 100, by the way, 10 years later, you know. So at the time, okay, they had majority youth. We also had majority youth, but their education level in Tunisia was more than 90% of the population are already educated. They like reading. They are very much affected by the Francophonic culture, which is already liberal and open, compared to Egypt, which is more Middle Eastern, people are more religious. They value religion more than anything. If you go to the villages, for example, you will find people listening to the sheikh or imam more than they are listening to the doctors or to even their local governors or anyone. So these differences, and also in Egypt, we have the literacy rate is about 40%. It's very big, very huge. So actually, if you put all these factors together, and also another fact that related to religion, that not Egyptians belong to one religion compared to Tunisia. Most Tunisians are Sunni Muslims. In Egypt, you have Sunni Muslims, you have Shia Muslims, you have Christians, you have Jews. It's a very, very diverse community, although of course with certain percentages, but the only one thing that unifies them is the Egyptian identity, which was not very strong at the time, by the way. Like now, of course, there is a lot of effort in the media and by the government to highlight this Egyptian identity above everything else, above all the religious and all the other identities we have. But at that time, no, people were actually, this religious identity was very important to them. So actually we were closer to the scenario of Yemen or Syria, where people were divided based on the religious affiliations or tribal affiliations, or like Libya, you know. So the best way that got out of this is that, again, there was some kind of a compromise between the three factors or the three players of the political scene. Somehow, some kind of undeclared agreement happened between the revolutionaries and the Islamists first inside the revolution, like between the young liberals and the political Islamists inside the revolution. By the way, before the revolution, like we were like this, like, you know, they didn't like each other, and we were like, oh, you are Muslim Brotherhood, I won't speak to you. Oh, you are liberal, you are not religious enough, so I won't speak to you, and so on. But the time of the revolution really brought them together, especially on the level of the youth of the Muslim Brotherhood and the young people of the liberal movement. So after that, there was some kind of a compromise that happened between the military and these revolutionaries, so they can get rid of Mubarak. So these dynamics, as these dynamics were playing, actually, we ended up having the results that we saw later on in the years following the revolution.
No, thank you for that. And I'm just going to say to anybody who's very interested, who will be interested, I think, after, to get hold of your book and read. I found it a very nice summary of the history of Egypt, the political movements and the key players within Egyptian politics, literally from, early part of the last century, even, going from, and also interestingly, the link between the Al-Azhar University, which you mentioned quite, and it is, as you know, it's for most of the Muslims around the world, it is seen as the symbol of academic excellence and Muslim scholarship for most of the world anyway. And so it's interesting how you sort of link it with the political sphere and how sometimes it was seen favorably in the time of Gamal Abdel Nasser. You discuss how he managed to marginalize it and trying to downplay Al-Azhar and his influence on people, because he was pushing the communist agenda within the people. And then subsequently, when it came to after the assassination, he had a heart attack, sorry, then Anwar Sadat basically sort of revived that side. And you sort of think you mentioned that he was actually in a way sort of facilitating the growth of Islamist thinking within that period in his time, but unfortunately he fell victim of their guns or their sort of anger and wrath at that time. So it's very interesting, because I think from a reader's point of view, because we all have had snippets of Egyptian history, we're familiar. I mean, I was born around the time of Anwar Sadat's demise. I've heard about him, saw clips of him, but not beyond that. And then Egypt has just evolved since then. And I think probably most of us only know the era of Mubarak, Hosni Mubarak, and 30 plus years is an impressive era, 3 decades of rule with an iron fist, possibly in a velvet glove, you could argue. And if I use that phrase, which you didn't use, but if I use it on the basis that you mentioned the illiberal democracy so it's another way of maybe explaining illiberal democracy, the velvet glove and the iron fist. On one hand, he was democratizing, on the other hand, he was becoming authoritarianism. And so there was a confusion within the minds of the people. What does he want from us? So it's a very interesting sort of, I like the way you've timelined it one after the other in this book. So I really appreciate that, actually. I mean, in terms of your, you've sort of mentioned throughout this whole period, you had another line of discussion around the rise of Islamism, or the political Islamism, which is the sort of Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, which is known as Ikhwanul Muslimin, founded in 1928, and it has continued to work within the fabric of Egyptian society till this day. And and you've sort of mentioned how and what's interesting is the time of when it actually arose in the early, just after the First World War, what was happening in Egypt and the rest of the Muslim world, and what predicated Muslim Brotherhood's sort of ascension in a way, which was to looking at the influence in Egypt of Western powers, the division, the carving up of the Islamic world at that time, into nations and lines in the sands, as one commentator mentioned, post the First World War and post Sykes-Picot Agreement. So that was something that has happened at that time. But you, interestingly, you said in one of your comments that after the death of the founder, Hassan al-Banna, unexpectedly, the movement's popularity didn't go down, which is interesting. And it continued to rise up and capture the imagination of people. What do you think? What were the sort of circumstances around that time, do you think, that led to that popularity? I mean, with Gamal Abdel Nasser's time, Cairo was known as the Hollywood of the East, as you mentioned, as a phrase, which was true. And you see old pictures and movie pictures of that time, very liberal society going on. So surely that was a breath of fresh air, a bit of liberalism within society coming in at that time. Why were people getting attracted to the other end, and what were they missing? And because keeping in mind that was the abolition of the caliphate, of the Ottoman Caliphate in 1924 in Turkey. So it was all happening around that time. maybe was it because of the lack of political identity that the people in Egypt felt at that time, and did they identify at that time at all with the Ottoman state, and just suddenly felt a motherless or parentless sort of nation at that time? What were your thoughts on that?
Actually, this is a very, very deep and interesting question. Thank you, Dr. Ali, for this. So let me explain first that for Egyptians, there is no differentiation, or there is no difference between their political identity and the religious identity. They mix between them a lot.
Right.
And actually, this is again since the time of ancient Egypt. So when Al-Azhar started to operate in Egypt and to be active in Egypt, at especially, Al-Azhar started some more than 1,000 years ago, being like an academic institution in Egypt.
I think the oldest university in the world. That's right.
Exactly, 1900s, something like, in the 1900s. So when it started at that time, the sheikhs of Al-Azhar or the imams of Al-Azhar, they were not only educating people about Quran and Hadith and that's it. No, actually, they were also very active in politics, and they helped people form groups first to fight against Napoleon Bonaparte when he invaded into Egypt, and then later on against the British occupation. And they were very active, and they even helped Muhammad Ali Pasha when he came when he took over Egypt, when he first came as a wali for the Ottoman Empire. And then he took over Egypt. For those who don't know this, he made a fight with the Ottoman Empire and he said, no, I want Egypt for myself. So he started to rule Egypt, and he started to build it from scratch, the modern Egypt that we see today. So even at that time, he was supported by Al-Azhar, by the sheikhs of Al-Azhar and the imams of Al-Azhar, who were actually some kind of his media machine, his Twitter and Facebook at that time. So they helped him. They were very active in politics, and this continued until later on in late 1880, late in 1800s. At that time, Egypt started 1800s. That's what I want to say. Yeah. So at that time, Egypt started to have its own military. Before, we did not have a military. So even at that time, the first thing the military did was to go to the sheikhs of Al-Azhar and seek their help and seek their support, and mobilizing people to stand by them against Al-Khidawi at that time, who were the children of Muhammad Ali Pasha later on. So as you can see, religion and Al-Azhar in particular was an integral part of everything that was happening in the Egyptian politics. Fast forward in the 1920s and later on, at that time, Egypt started to become more liberal. Not Egypt actually, but Cairo and Alexandria. There was the world wars happening in Europe. More people from Europe traveling to Egypt or escaping from Europe, coming to countries like Egypt, Lebanon, and so on. So they became to westernize the main cities in these countries, including in Egypt. As Cairo became more westernized, more open, more liberal, the villages and the rest of Egypt were marginalized. And the people there felt like, well, we're not good enough because we are not living in Cairo. People there in Cairo, having all, these city lights, theaters, people singing, people happy, rich people only living in these cities, mingling with Westerners, it's a different lifestyle. At that time, Al-Azhar role was diminishing, actually, because it was not accepted by the society in the main cities. So it couldn't have the same role it has previously, especially at that time. There was a movement by Saad Pasha Zaghloul. He was a lawyer who wanted to to liberalize Egypt. Actually, he wanted to adopt this liberal movement and started this liberal movement in Egypt, encouraged women to go out and to work, and So this somehow, alienated the people of the non-Cairo people, the non-Alexandria people, the people who don't live in the main cities. That's at that, and again, they were not able to fulfill, you know, their need to be proud of their religion anymore, because Al-Azhar is now absent. Being religious is not something good anymore, like in this very liberalized society. So there was a need somehow for something to substitute Al-Azhar. At that time, Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, he was a school teacher, actually, an Arabic school teacher. He was very smart to realize that there is a gap that he can fill in. So he did not start his movement from Cairo, for example, the main city. No, he went far to an eastern city, an eastern village, a village in the eastern of Egypt, a very small village in Ismailiyah. And he started his movement, started to speak to the people and tell them, no, you can be proud as a Muslim, you can do many things as a Muslim. And gradually he started to build a movement around himself, and people liked what he's saying, again, like, you know, regaining their sense of pride in their religion and having religion as you know, political power. It's now their political power, their social power. Sure. So from there started the movement of the Muslim Brotherhood. Later on, when Gamal Abdel Nasser came in power, he came with a communist agenda, which was very popular at that time. The Soviet Union was promoting it everywhere, and Gamal Abdel Nasser was one of the people who were very fond with the socialist communist thought, and he tried to promote this in Egypt. But in the process, again, he purposefully marginalized Al-Azhar even more and more. He even prevented sheikhs from, you know, speaking to the people on Friday prayers. He had to send them papers with the khutbah, the speech they should say in the prayer on Friday. Can you imagine? Like, they don't have even the freedom to choose what to say in the mosque. So he was giving them what they should be saying in the mosques, marginalizing them, keeping them away from media. So at that time, people grew more and more attached to the, I would say, the non-official Islamic movement, because the official Islamic umbrella is not there anymore. So they went to the non-official Islamic umbrella, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, and grew more attached to it. Then when Nasser died and Sadat came in power, actually he was opposed by, they were fighting him, the socialists, the Nasserists, the people who believed very much in the communist thought, because he wanted to apply, you know, open market and liberal, not liberal in the same old way of Saad Zaghloul or this era, but liberal market, openness to the West. He became friends with the United States, became even the British leaders started to congratulate him and be close to him. So he wanted to make Egypt like similar to these countries. He was opposed by the Nasserists, who are more on the side of the Soviet Union, who's still embracing the communist thought and so. So he thought, well, the best way to combat them is not to confront them directly, but to even empower the Islamists more and more. And the interesting
that's how they rose. That's how they rose at that time. Yeah.
Exactly. In the 70s, like, they were everywhere. And he empowered both, like the official Islamists from Al-Azhar, like they were on media all the time. And they even became like, you know, media stars. Like people go around them in the streets, they speak in the media all the time. And also the non-official Islamists from the Muslim Brotherhood became very powerful at that time, speaking to the public, even having their own mosques and their own places to gather in. So it was great, and he was able to do what he wanted. But unfortunately, later on, when there was in the process, actually, like, you know, anything when it comes over a certain limit, it becomes wrong, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know what is the right expression.
I know you touch on that. Maybe later on I can. I am actually I've extended my license as a host today beyond the time that I said I would. And this topic can go on for hours. I mean, because there's a 6,000-year history, trying to squeeze into 30 minutes, it doesn't work. The reason why it's a live show and live discussion is to allow our participants to ask you questions also directly. I think I've said enough up to this point. There's so many other points that can be raised. And I think we don't want to give a reading of your book right now, all of it. Otherwise, people won't go out and buy or read that book and reflect on it. So maybe you should just say, refer to this as an answer. That might be a quicker way to say, read this, and that's the answer of your question is there. So I'm going to actually open up the floor now for any questions with regards to the situation in Egypt, even around the time of the revolution, even post-revolution, if anybody feels, and what you're being on the ground. So I think our first hand was raised by Wazir Baksh. Is that right? Are you still with your hands up? I can't see.
Yes.
Yes, please, Mr. Baksh. Wazir, if you're kind enough to, please unmute yourself and ask a question. Thank you.
It happened that my eldest son was at Azhar at the time of the first revolution, and what amazed me when he told me the way how, because when the police let out the criminals in Cairo, the way how the people were self-organizing for security and food and the other thing because of everybody at Tahrir Square. I didn't read the book. I don't know if the book touched on those things and the people's own involvement, indirect involvement to bring about, in a self-organizing. The other thing is that what I have read and I have discussed with people, with the Islamists, I mean, first of all, I don't know how much you touch on the social media in bringing down autocratic regimes. Because what I have read, both in the social media and in books that I have bought on the Arab Spring, that people were trained in the Arab world. Youths, liberal youths were trained. They had 3 training programs in Europe and 2 in the USA. And how to use social media. And the test case was in Tunisia, then Egypt, to bring down democratic regime, authoritarian regime, because they were looking at how do you bring down regime, less cost, no military, external military, and what have you. So how those dynamics interplay in Egypt, and also the Salafi, we're talking about Muslim Brotherhood, but there was a partnership between the Salafi and the Muslim Brotherhood to form the government. And in some places, the Salafi just break away and leave the Brotherhood out in the cold, I would say. And thirdly, I'm asking here, why did the Muslim Brotherhood decide to go into the election in the first place when they were telling people during the protests that we will not go into the elections? But subsequently, they went to the elections, and the Islamists, Salafi / Brotherhood, Ikhwan, they won the election, and then they went through that process and want to set up a Sharia constitution and the like, and it's history now. The military re-intervened and came back into power. I mean, I might be a little disjointed, but I just like to get those points. The point on social media, external training of these young activists, bring down an authoritarian regime, and what is the relationship with them and the military?
That's a very good question, actually. So, Dalia, would you like to address that? I mean, we'll try and get others questioned in, so if you can focus on that point.
Brief.
Yeah, if you can, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, actually, thank you so much for the question. It's very, very good one. And I have already touched, of course, on all this in the book, starting from the tactics that the people were using in the revolution. You spoke about the training. Yes, of course, people receive, especially the young people, received training in Europe and in the US, but not all of them, just those who were politically active, active in some political movements. They had access to this knowledge of nonviolent action and the strategies, but not trained on how to use social media. This happened naturally, I think, because social media was very new at the time, and people were on the internet, especially young people were on the internet all the time. They used Facebook for everything, starting from like personally chatting up to organizing groups for social activities and so when the time came to organize for political activism, they ran to this. And actually what encouraged them to do that is that they have seen 2 years before, in 2009, the Iranian young people were using social media to make themselves heard by, especially Twitter, to be heard by the world. At that time, there were protests inside Iran, and they were successful in getting their voice out through social media. So at that time of the Egyptian revolution, people thought like, okay, we should employ this tool as well. The other part of your question, which is also very interesting, is about the Salafist movement in Egypt. I think, first of all, the people who were active in the revolution were not the Salafists, by the way. Salafists all the time were we are not for politics, we are only religious people, we have this thought and we want to promote, we don't want politics. So they were away all the time. Unlike the Muslim Brotherhood say, yes, we have da'wah, which is a preach, something we want to promote regarding religion, but we also have political goals. We have a political ambitions to achieve. At the time of the revolution, of course, like not all the Muslims, but everyone was saying, including the revolutionists themselves, were saying that we don't want politics. We don't want to be in politics, including the young people who made the revolution. And they said, we don't want to be in politics. We'll bring anyone in because politics is dirty and we don't want that. But later, something interesting really happened, because this vacuum in power that was created, the young people, the liberal democratic people, did not want to fill in. They don't think it's dirty things that they don't want to do. And at the same time, the option was open for the military to take over, which means actually as if we've done nothing, as if there wasn't not a revolution. If the military comes back immediately after a revolution and takes over, this is crazy, So we wanted a civilian movement that can fill in this vacuum of power. And unfortunately, there were no good political parties in Egypt at the time. All of them were, cartoonistic political parties that were actually very much created by Mubarak regime just to tell the world, look, we have political parties, but they were not effective at all. So the only group that was really able, that was actually politically organized and really able to do something, to be in power, to practice politics, or to take leadership, was the Muslim Brotherhood. That's why the doors were open to them and they get in. At that time, the Salafists found it a good opportunity to, jump on the boat. So they said, okay, take us with you. We will support you. We have a large base of grassroots citizens and popular supporters. Take us, put us in parliament. You take presidency, we take parliament, and we will do good things together. But unfortunately, when the Salafists came in power, things were very bad. Imagine they are not political at all, and all they were caring about, imagine of course I'm a Muslim myself, but of course, imagine seeing in the middle of a parliament session, someone stands up and starts to say azan. This was what the hell is going on? it's okay. If you want to do this, you go to the mosque, not inside the parliament room. So all of a sudden we felt like we are in Afghanistan or something, you know. So people started to get scared. Also, they started also the Salafists in the parliament to make laws or to pass legislations that are very discriminative against women. So women started also to be scared. Unfortunately, this led to the failure eventually of the Muslim Brotherhood government itself, because people couldn't differentiate at that time. It's not only the Salafists who are on the very far right of an extremist Muslim thought, or it is the more moderate or relatively moderate political Muslim Brotherhood. So at the end of the day, they are the Islamists, you know, all together, they were the Islamists. So people started to be scared of all of them together. So it ended up being people coming out again and trying to get rid of them. And unfortunately, the only option at that time was, well, to allow the military back in.
Yeah.
And it ended up having the military back in.
Yeah. So I think the question, another question here, Masoom has written, I need to just read out to you on our chat line. You may have access to that and be able to read it. What do you think happened with the Egyptian elite, the writers, the poets? A significant number were either silent, compromised, or did a 180 degrees U-turn basically, and betrayed their previously held positions on commitment towards a democratic Egypt. What do you think has happened to them? Were they browbeaten into silence? Were they just completely disillusioned? I think I get the gist of that question. I'm assuming this is post-revolution, you know, obviously the reality in the last, you know, 10, 12, well, no, 5, 6, 7 years. Do you think, is that something that people will have? They just felt, you know what, we've did our bit, we got rid of one guy, we'll come back in 30 years to do another. What do you think? I'm assuming, Masoom, if that question is related to that, if you think I've got the wrong end of the stick, feel free to add on that, please. And unless you want to put your hand up and come on mic and say something. Sorry, yes, Dalia.
Yeah, so as I understand now, he's asking about the current situation, like today's situation,
I'm
right?
assuming so. I'm assuming, unless let me just see if there's his written. No, he hasn't. That needs clarification actually, because it does. Yeah, I'm not sure.
But I can give you like a general image about like what's happening. So actually, after all these, you know, turmoils, and it was not only a short period of time, but after the revolution, we had just another rebellious activity, and then the military came in, and even recently in 2019, people again started to go out to the street and make protests. And before that, I think in 2016, also there was another attempt to make protests. But what's happening is some kind of, you know, I would say political fatigue. People are tired.
Sorry, Dalia, sorry to interrupt. Masoom has written, he's having sound issues on his mic. So he's written, no, actually, I'm referring to the military takeover.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as I was just explaining, the military had to come in because there was no option at the time. People were very scared of the Islamists and the extremist ideas they started to apply in the society. Basically, the Salafis who were in control of the parliament and legislation. And also, by the way, at the time, the economic situation was very difficult. And the Muslim Brotherhood, when they came in power, they couldn't handle things appropriately, economically and politically. Also, don't forget, they have never been in such an advanced political situation before, like a political position. I mean, like they didn't have power on that level before. So they were always suppressed over their history from practicing politics or being, they were on the side of the activists, but not on the side of decision makers, politicians. So it was also difficult on them to run a state as big as Egypt. So they failed economically and politically. At the same time, the Salafists are using their power in parliament to promote these extremist ideas that scared everyone. So people started to be scared. They wanted to get rid of them, but the only way to get rid of them is to allow the military in. That at that time, when the military actually thought, okay, now it's our opportunity to restore everything that we have previously lost, and they started to have, okay, one second, sorry. So they started to have come back in power. And at that time, I remember I was working at a think tank, and we ran some surveys in the streets asking people what they think about military coming back to power. And to our surprise, the rates were very high. Approval rates of the military were very high. Everyone wanted the military to come back. So, well, okay. This was the reality. Like, there was no way to push this back. But later on, I think people more than once since then tried to resist, but unfortunately, they don't have the social support anymore that we had before this big political events that we had between 2011 and 2014. And people are really tired, economically tired, politically tired. We don't want instability again. People want security, want to live happy, even if they know there are some corruption or political misbehaviors or so, but they want to keep things going like this.
Okay, thank you for that. Actually, in terms of, I think no, that does answer hopefully to Masoom. Where are we now? Is there any other one? There were so yeah, no. So I mean, Masoom left a comment there. One can have a read of it. I'm going to ask Wazir. Baksh has put his hand up again. Anyone else that has got their hand up would like to ask Dalia, our guest, a question with regards to that period? If not, I will take, I can't see everybody's hands. Please do. Naeem, is there anyone else there that we can see? No. So Wazir, you're welcome to ask your second question, unless somebody wants to trump you.
Well, may I ask a question?
Yes, please do.
In the meantime, while Brother Wazir is trying to raise his hand. My question to Dalia is, tell me something about the current situation in Egypt led by Sisi. How is the socio-political situation at the moment in terms of unemployment, poverty, whole range of economic situation? How is the socio-political environment at the moment over there?
Yeah, so economically, I think we're doing well, much better than before, thanks to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund loans, and also support from Arab Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, that are supportive of El-Sisi. And they pour a lot of money in the form of investments, and so somehow this is keeping the economy doing well, which is also decreasing the unemployment rates, making more people going to work, being active, especially the young people. So somehow this is, calming the situation. Also, recently we started to have new discoveries of natural gas in the Mediterranean, which actually also improving the Egyptian economy and improving the status of Egypt as a hub for exporting gas in the Mediterranean. And so for the first time last year, we started to have a surplus of gas production compared to natural gas consumption. So, and we started to export to Europe and to Turkey and to places as far as Northwestern Europe in the Netherlands. So that's good news economically. But on the other side, for keeping this economic prosperity, not prosperity yet, but this economic development going forward, people are giving up on other rights on the political side, on their basic rights, actually, on the political side. I wouldn't say civil society almost dying right now, almost diminishing. Very few organizations are only active and working. And unfortunately, many of them are pro-state, El-Sisi, and there is no much freedom for those who are against it. We still don't have strong political parties that can really compete. Like, for example, if for any reason we have to make political change tomorrow, there is no one to replace El-Sisi. There is no one who is qualified enough to replace El-Sisi. No political party even can compete in any upcoming elections or so, which I don't think is a good sign on what we want to achieve regarding democratization that we have been dreaming about like 10 years ago in the revolution. But at least I'm somehow, I don't know, deep in my heart, I'm still optimistic that one day we will get to this point where we can be a democratic country, maybe in our own way, but somehow we will get to this point.
So I think, Dalia, your words, your sentiments are in a way shared. Masoom and Nahid actually mentions. Masoom says economically Egypt may be doing well, so is Saudi. However, both are how far away from democracy. Nahid raised a very one question is, what is the environmental situation like in Egypt? He was interested to know, was that something that has become a big issue at all within Egypt and Egyptian people?
Yeah, it's interesting, like this comparison between Egypt and Saudi, because sometimes here in Egypt I hear it a lot actually. People look at countries like Saudi, the Arab Gulf countries in general, as like, oh, we want to be like them. And of course they say this in economic terms, like they want to be economically as rich and wealthy like them. But if you look on the democratic side, no, we need to do better on the democratic side, to be more democratic, to be more open to civil society, to be, all these, I believe this is even more important than economic prosperity, because if you live in a free country, sooner or later you will have economic prosperity.
I have a challenging question for you, Dalia. I've kept for you towards one of the end questions. Now, in your book, you mentioned about Canvas, the Center for Applied Nonviolent Action and Strategies. This was basically an organization which has taken on the activists and trained them, or with their sort of help, the training into non-violent actions taken against regimes. And you mentioned, am I correct you mentioned that in your book, Canvas, the Center for Applied Nonviolent Action and Strategies. Now these centers in Europe, in UK, in America, who teach civilians how to protest against authoritarian regimes. My question to you, I'm a little bit perplexed in the sense that why would America teach the civilians of other countries to protest in a non-violent way when they go themselves with the big guns into countries like Iraq and Afghanistan? And what has, in my mind, highlighted that, is it actually the well-wishing of the US administration or the US military? Because you mentioned very nicely the strong link between the US military and the Egyptian military, the 1.3 billion US aid that goes to the military on a yearly basis, $1.3 billion to keep them sweet and happy and satisfied. What is it that ultimately they're getting out of this? Is it just they don't like to see the bodies in Tahrir Square? And I didn't even touch on the issue of the Rabat massacre or the situation, and you may want to do that. Or is it, as the very lovely phrase that these countries have no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, only permanent interests, and therefore the interest is being served for countries like US and UK and Europe by allowing this? Why? Because in the absence of violence and a transition through this, for instance, the reverse RNA, reverse non-violent action, which the military did in a very skillful way around the 2011 revolution, what it did do ultimately served the US administration. Ultimately, do you see where I'm coming from?
Yes.
So ultimately, they kept the military still in power. They went through a showcase of change in regime. They showed the Islamic world, hey, guys have been all going on about Islamic system and Muslim political system, but look how pathetic it is under the auspices of Mr. Morsi, and therefore don't bother calling for it again. You're better off with a military regime that is happy and well fed and will keep you there. What do you think? I'm maybe a bit cynical, but it's a question that arose in my mind reading from your book. What do you think?
Yeah, and actually this is what happened. Like now, this is the reality we are living. People are more acceptable of having the military back in power rather than having Islamists, especially because of this particular experience. And even not only in Egypt, but also in Tunisia and in other places in the region, the Middle East region, in other Arab Spring countries. But let me go to the first part of your question about this training of activists. So it all started in 2009. Actually, no, let me start before that. The movement for studying the science of nonviolent action and activities started in the 1990s by a scholar, in the 1980s, even by a scholar called Jean Thorpe. That scholar, he started to study the movements that were happening in Eastern Europe, how the young people there were able to change their societies, employing nonviolent action and strategies that at that time they didn't know what it is. Actually, they were just doing it spontaneously. So he studied that. He created theories out of this and put in box. And then later on, some organizations were formed. They were not really think tanks, but organizations like civil society organizations formed by the same young people who participated in these revolutions, including Canvas, for example. And they started to take the theory of Jane Sharp and their practice on the ground, put them together and create some kind of a playbook or a guidebook that they can give to activists all over the world, not only in the Middle East, but everywhere, that they can use and apply to either change dictatorships, fight against corruption, and so on. So this created some kind of an academic movement inside the US at that time. When the Iranian Revolution happened in 2009, and actually it was faced by, not revolution, I'm sorry, it was not a revolution, but it was very uprising. Yeah, protests were very, very big at the time, that you can easily think it was a popular revolution. And it was taking everyone in the region by surprise, everyone in the world, even President Obama of the United States, he was in Cairo at that time making his first speech ever outside the US, and he called it the speech to the Muslim world. He somehow in his speech, he mentioned this, that the young people are now the true leaders of the future and they can take the lead. This inspired the people all over the region. 4 months after his speech, the Iranian uprising started, and 2 years later, the Egyptian revolution and Tunisian revolution and the Arab Spring started. So this, at that time, after the Iran uprising, the scholars worldwide and the people interested in nonviolent action and strategies started to look at the Middle East, and they started to know that something is going to happen in this region. Like, you know, of course, some claim that it's the West who made the Arab Spring happen or who created it, but no, the Arab Spring, it was inevitable. It had to happen. Like, corruption was everywhere, political instability, it had to happen. But they wanted to make sure that when it happens, it doesn't lead to something ugly. It doesn't lead something similar to what happened in Iran, bloodshed and so. So they thought, okay, we should train the young people. We should at least give them the knowledge and the experience that we have. That's why these centers at that time, Canvas and other centers from the US and Europe, started to go to the activists and political activists and train them on how to use these tactics when the time comes or whenever they need it. That's why when the revolution happened, they were able to use it. And sorry, what was?
No, I'm just saying that. Do you feel? I think you've answered part of the main gist of my question, which was to do with the ultimately this whole sort of promotion of nonviolent activism. Because if you think about it, the regimes on one hand are being fed with $1 billion check, and that's not just Egypt. We're talking about throughout the world, and wherever there's authoritarian regimes that are being propped up by Western superpowers. And one hand, they are propping up those regimes. So you could argue Syria was one of them, and so forth. And before Saddam Hussein, he was one of them. So ultimately, when they don't serve the purpose, but what's interesting is one hand the military is being served with a checkbook, and the other hand there's nonviolent activism training to sort of switch around the regime, because Mubarak was past his due date. We needed a change in an actor and a face. Like Donald Trump, he was getting a bit irritating to the public and to a significant portion of the US population. Change him around, let him come back again, but let's get another guy in for now. Ultimately will serve to quieten the people. So again, my cynical self is basically mentioning that. But an interesting question here to the author Dalia Ziada. Are you able to freely travel and hold talks, write your views in Egypt currently, before or after writing the book?
Oh, that's a very good question. Yes, but I would say I wouldn't hide it, but sometimes I practice some kind of self-censorship on myself.
Sure.
Out of fear, of course, of reprisal, or but as much as I can, I still have this activist inside of me. It comes out from time to time and speaks. Of course, I travel, I speak. Not at the time of the COVID, but before that I was doing this all the time. Now I'm trying to do this as well, and as much as I can, I try to be honest and open as I always been.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I'm very mindful of the time now. We're about to finish shortly because we have kept you, and it's late for you, Dalia, and I think our audiences are from different parts of the world, so it becomes a bit oppressive if they don't see an end in sight. We will be finishing in about 3 minutes to 4 minutes. I think, Mr. Wazir, are you back again, or is there any other new hand? If you want to ask a question, please unmute yourself and do ask. I'm told that your hand is raised, but I can't see it at the moment. No? Okay. I can't see that at the moment. Look, I mean, I want to sort of ask you. I mean, one of the questions I have for you, Dalia, I haven't even touched on. Again, it will not do your book a justice, and this is my advice to the folks to actually go and get this book and read it. And the reason being is definitely it's a gold mine of so much information there, and therefore so many angles that can be touched on. I gained a lot from it. There was an area, I mean, towards the end, you were reasonably critical, I would say, to put it mildly, of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamist sort of attempt to rule society, and how they were trying to do, impose their view on Egyptian society. My question to you, and again, I'll maybe finish in the way that are you looking for an Egypt to become a two-legged wolf, minus the diseased leg of Islamism, or do you think there's still room for all three legs to exist within the Egyptian society, and therefore a functioning wolf that continues to hobble but still can have some form of a life?
Oh, I like how you put it. I love it, actually. It's beautiful. And I think, I like looking back at all this experience we had over this 10 years, I think for Egypt to continue surviving and moving on forward, the three elements should be present in one way or another. And they should not be present in the same ways that they have always used to be, like competing against each other and everyone is fighting to take part of the cake, from the other. No, I hope they find a way that the three elements, Islamism, military, and liberals or Democrats, to find a way to coexist together. and to help Egypt to move forward. Of course, I know I'm saying something that looks like a dream, but it should happen. It should happen like this, because religious identity is very important for Egyptians. You can't just tell them put it aside and be, liberal or so. At the same time, the people who tested the revolution, who tested freedom, who tested liberalism, who tested what it means to want democracy and fight for democracy, won't be able to give up on that. Also, a big portion of our population, especially people who are maybe our parents' age or so, are very much into military, and they worship the military, kind of. So you cannot tell them, okay, put this military aside, we don't want it. But maybe before I was more biased toward this the liberal side, but now I'm speaking like based on the experience and I had over these years. No, the three elements must be very active in the society and coexistent.
I'm really pleased to hear your. I mean, you might need to do a second edition of your book very soon to reflect that thinking, and I'm really impressed the way that has changed. And I actually. That warms my heart listening to that, actually, because it is inclusive rather than exclusive. So we are actually at the end of our session. I really would love to maybe even invite you back in the future, in the near future, maybe to do more of a focus chat on something that is going on. People may wish to contact you. I have the privilege of your book and your email address. Can I post it on here? Your
yes, please.
Please. So yeah. This is the email address I've just put for Dalia on there. Dalia@egildi, is it egyldi.org? That's the Liberal Democratic Institute, Egypt Liberal Democratic Institute.org. So you can contact her with any questions or comments. That if you're okay with that, Dalia.
Sure.
And so I'm going to close the session for today. I thank everybody with regards to their participation, and I'm really some thought-provoking questions there coming from our audience. I'm just happy with. I really would like to thank you, Dalia, for joining and spending quite a late evening now. I believe it's nearly midnight for you, isn't it? 11:30.
No, it's only 10:30. Yeah.
But you go to bed early, no? In Egypt, no, not yet.
I know, not before 11:30. You've been to Egypt, yeah, we don't sleep. Yeah.
I'm still in time. So I'd just like to say that we have a new lecture series. Kames has organized a new lecture series on the decolonizing of social sciences from uniplexity to multiplexity, to be started on Monday the 14th at 6 p.m. with Professor Dr. Recep Şentürk, one of our previous speakers on our and one of the leading social science scholars and founding president of Ibn Khaldun University from Turkey. And that will be a very interesting set of lectures, and more of that will be available on our WhatsApp group. And so please do look out for that and join us. So with further ado, I'd like to bid you all good evening, and God bless. Take care. Bye for now.
Thank you, Dalia. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dalia.
Thank you. Thank you.